Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judah, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
Yes, welcome in, ladies and gents, boys and girls. Another week of NFL football is in the can, and boy, oh boy, can you tell we've reached October, gents? Firstly, it's back in London, which is always great to see. But secondly, and more importantly tonight, it's bloody freezing, and it's too expensive to put your heating on. So I'm sitting here dithering in my hoodie for an evening, but joined by the boys for another fun week, I'm sure. Josh, welcome in, mate. How are you, pal?
Yeah, I'm bloody freezing as well, mate, to be fair. One thing which I'm not freezing on, though, is being able to pick some of these games. I've ended up rinsing the bookies for 500 quid this week. So even though the Browns lost, I was able to console myself with putting the heating on tonight. That's pretty much all we're going to be able to do at this rate. You have to win in order to keep the lights on and the house heated. But apart from that, mate, sound as a pound. Glad to be on here with you for yet another Monday to talk through some NFL football.
Yeah, looking forward to getting into it. Joined once again by James, as Steve is still over in the States. I'm pleased to say that Steve did get some tickets for that Jags game, and I think he got a little bit wet, but I'm sure he would have enjoyed himself in the end after a bit of a dodgy start. We'll get into that. But James, welcome back for a second week running, mate. How are you, pal?
Yeah, glad to be back again. I'll be sad to rescind the seat, but I'll keep it dry for him. But I'm also cold, about as cold as the Steelers' offense. But yeah,
it's all good now, mate. King Kenny's in. We'll talk about that as well in a minute.
We'll get to that.
We'll start as we have done throughout the course of this season, fellas. Let's start with something that we love this week. Josh, let's start with you. What did you love this week in the NFL in particular?
You know what? It's the fact that the NFL is just consistently inconsistent. You know, every week seems to be something different and something that makes your mouth open and go, I'm sorry, what? This week you've had the fact that the Saints and the Vikings game looked like it was going to complete, boring, typical London game where a team strolls to a victory, then the Saints come out of nowhere, and then that ends up, going through a double doink. And then last night, as I'm tearing my hair out watching the Cardinals unable to get past Baker Mayfield's Panthers for 3 quarters, and Aaron Rodgers not being able to beat Bailey Zappi, of which, first of all, why is his name not Zappa? It should definitely be Zappa. You're an NFL quarterback. Zappa, not Zappi. Come on. But, being able to, have these games and these little intricacies and all these very, very, small point games where most games, I think, ended up being settled by less than a TD. It is a sight to behold nowadays. It is such a competitive league.
Yeah, most definitely. More and more games seemingly only settled by that one score. Does really keep you on the edge of your seat. We'll talk about the London game in a minute because, like you say, it built to a really exciting crescendo after a little bit of a slow start. But like I say, we'll get into that in a minute. James, let's turn to you, mate. I think your what you loved was on the opposite end of the scale. It wasn't a tight and boring game. It was a scoring explosion, mate. Take us through it.
Technically, it was tight when you kind of look at it. There was only a 3-point difference in the end, but Scorigami, and for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's a phenomenon where like unique scores in the NFL. So there's a website and a Twitter feed that have tracked all the results in NFL history, and the Seahawks 48-45 victory over the Lions was the 1073rd different unique scoreline in the NFL. So in all the years that the sport has been played, 48-45 is not an official scoreline until yesterday. It's these little mad things are incredible, and that game was just madness, and I loved it.
It was. It
I feel
was
like the
totally
Lions in
bonkers.
general. Yeah, the Lions in general are just madness at the moment. They'll score for fun, but they'll also just carry you into the end zone as well.
And they don't need any of their they don't even need their primary weapons to be particularly scoring. There was no DeAndre Swift, there was no Amon-Ra St. Brown, there was no DJ Chark. So effectively, TJ Hawkinson decided, you know what, everyone, on my back. And Jared Goff was like, well, let me take some of the weight as well. Jamal Williams stepped up. It was just, that was just that was just so much fun.
It was an incredible game. Like you say, Scorigami, again, I got all excited because it looked like Scorigami was going to come in, and then the Lions scored a touchdown. And I thought, oh, no, they've ruined it. I need to realise that 45 was also going to be Scorigami. So I believe that means 48-38 is still waiting to happen. So do find it strange that some of these combinations have never happened in all of the years of NFL football. But yeah, it's a good little follow, that one. Always enjoy a bit of Scorigami on a Sunday night. In terms of me, what did I love this weekend? Do you know what? I love the fact that it was back in London. I love the London games, really do. I think it makes a Sunday afternoon, when you got 4 back-to-back, it's really, really exciting. I think, this one that's upcoming this weekend is one that fans have waited for a long time in terms of the Packers. We'll probably talk about that a little bit towards the back end of the episode tonight. But, to see the NFL back and to see it back in all of its glory, and what I mean by that is all of the pre-show events, the tailgating, all of that kind of stuff actually back on a grander scale. It's obviously been much reduced the last couple of years through obvious circumstances. But to actually have all of the events in and around the game, to make it feel like a big special occasion once again, was great. And look, we've been very, very fortunate, haven't we, that the NFL decided their expansion was going to start in the UK. Obviously, games now in other countries, and let's just hope that doesn't mean that this NFL football that we've become almost accustomed to now starts disappearing. Because that will be a real shame. It's obviously 2 or 3 weekends a year that people really do look forward to. I know I'm looking forward to going down in a month's time. I've got tickets to the Wembley game this year. I know a few of the lads in the group were down at Tottenham this weekend, and I'm sure a few will be there this weekend as well. So great to see football back on this side of the Atlantic. But go on, Josh, you want to say something before I move on?
Yeah, which one is that? Who are the Jags playing?
The Broncos.
No, turns out that's actually a really good game then. Before when they first went on sale, it didn't seem like a great game at all, did it? All of a sudden, obviously the next few weeks will tell, but that has suddenly become a really tasty game.
No, it certainly has. And ironically, the one that's upcoming this weekend is the first time a London game will have 2 teams with winning records. Can you believe that? 14 years in.
No, because it's got the New York Giants in it. No, I can't believe it.
First time it's ever happened. But right, let's go back then, fellas, because I want to start this week in terms of some of the sort of controversy and some of the things we're going to talk about. And I want to go back to Thursday night football. We don't cover it usually an awful lot on the pod because obviously it's been a few days removed, and obviously people are sort of very much thinking about what happened last night in terms of the Sunday slab. But I don't want to necessarily talk about the game too much. The Bengals getting back on the win column 27-15 over the Miami Dolphins. I want to talk specifically about the situation with Tua because we were on the podcast last week. I need to stop being so sort of nice and just imagining that everybody does the right thing all the time, because I said probably nothing to worry about. I'm sure they'd have gone through all the concussion protocols, and there would have been no chance this guy would have been let on the field if there were any issues. Here we are now, a week later. A horrible looking incident on Thursday night football, which was obviously compounded by what had happened the weekend before. And obviously that was then becoming very fresh in everybody's mind. But for those of you that have been living under a rock, obviously Tua took a sack. Nothing wrong with the sack, but it was just a sort of violent way that he actually ended up being almost thrown to the ground. His head hitting the turf again, which is obviously the issue that happened in the previous game. And then there's obviously those images, the disturbing images of Tua in what's sort of known as the fencing position, which effectively meant that his arms and fingers were in very unnatural positions. And obviously, he did not return to this game, and his status moving forward will obviously be under close evaluation. I want to talk, though, fellas, about a couple of things. Firstly, that's the comments from Mike McDaniel, which was that Tua was fortunate that he got nothing more than a concussion, which really kind of downplayed the fact that this is a very, very serious injury. The league has had issues historically. There's obviously been a lot of research. There's been some controversial documentaries, etc., etc. So, question one, I suppose, is: do we think that people within the game have actually got a grasp on how serious this actually is? And then, secondly, in terms of Tua in particular, and whether it be Tua, you could substitute it for Patrick Mahomes, you could substitute it for Joe Burrow, who was on the opposite side of the field on Thursday night. If a player is of a certain status, either the quarterback or a star player on the team, do we think that these things are looked at differently? Because as much as we want to believe it's an independent person, you can probably guarantee there's somebody from the team having a little word in the ear saying, oh, come on, we need him for this game. This is going to be important for our season, etc., etc. James, I'll throw it to you first, mate. Either answer one or both, mate. But concussions, much again, like I say, massively in the news this week.
Yeah, it was a tough one. I was almost inclined last week to actually believe that it was actually a spinal thing, but when you sort of look at the wider picture, it's sort of hard to disagree with with the fact that the two are interlinked, and it's neurotrauma in both senses, whether it be through the head, through the spine, through the nervous system, whatever. So it's clear. It's pretty obvious that they haven't necessarily got a clue that in terms of the seriousness of it, the fact that they're already looking at changing the rules. It's a case of it's reactive rather than proactive once again, which is sadly what we've come to expect sometimes from the NFL, but especially when it comes to player safety. But yeah, it's just not a good situation to be in, full stop. He obviously won't be playing sort of next week, and it'll be a closer scrutiny. In terms of whether star players get a different treatment, it kind of reminds me, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, I probably didn't, about I think it was one of the Manning brothers, I think it was Peyton, deliberately flunked the concussion test that they used to determine sort of the level of concussion, so that it was a lower threshold for him to get out of it. Now, I don't know whether that whether that is still the methodology that's used, but it seems very easy to get around that kind of methodology. So the question essentially would be, is their method of determining how concussed a player is it basically uncheatable, which I'm going to pretty much guess that you can cheat it quite comfortably, and then how often do players actually do this sort of thing? So it's one of those up to the powers that be, but I think they need some kind of different test that is not based on a player determining answers to a test or something like that. It has to be something a bit more in depth and much less subjective.
Yeah, Josh, what's your view on it, mate? I mean, it's one of those, isn't it? I suppose the star players, it becomes much more of a storyline then because of the name involved. I suppose, really, if you're a guy that's number 53 on the roster, you're probably going to want to do everything you absolutely can to get back in the game because ultimately somebody else might be taking your place. So, I mean, ultimately, this is about player safety. Reputation shouldn't come into it, but I can't help but feel with things that we've seen, and I wasn't aware of that story with Manning, but again, you can certainly believe that to be the case. It is something that the league do desperately need to get a handle on before the situation becomes even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think that what you've just said is something of which could be taken in a different direction. So obviously this becomes much more of a storyline. Therefore, the league should be doing more to stop to stop it from becoming a storyline. Tua should not have stepped back on the field against the Bills. Should not should not have taken the field against the Bengals. Not a chance. You could tell that was something to do with his head. Back spasms don't make you do that. I don't care what you say. They don't make it. You look at Patrick Mahomes against the Browns in the divisional playoff 2 years ago. The way of which he fell to the ground, wobbled and fell to the ground. That was a concussion. The exact same thing happened here. And then you've got such dangerous things like, second impact injuries, of second impact syndrome, I think they call it, SIS, of which is so much more damaging as well. As a team, do you want to be taking the risk of that with your multi-million-dollar asset if you're going to break it down into numbers? Surely not, because then you've lost a player not only for a number of weeks, but maybe also that's his entire career done as well. So if you look at it from a Moneyball perspective, it's not right. If the league looks at it from an optics perspective, your quarterback constantly getting hit in the head is not going to look good at all. We wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't someone like Tua, if it was person 53. And the quarterback is obviously one of the most vulnerable positions because of obviously the targeting for sacks, etc. So I agree with you that there is probably there's definitely a team angle to suggest that you should be looking for ways around it from a team perspective. But realistically, if you look at optics and also the long term, you should be doing everything possible to be as cautious as possible with your prized asset.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I say, I was very much in the same camp as James. Like I say, I just assumed last week that all the protocols would have been followed, that, everybody would have been ultra cautious. It does seem to be the first one that's sprung up in a while. The league do seem to have clamped down on it relatively well in recent times. But like I say, over the last week, a few of these things have been called into question. Obviously, the supposedly independent neurologist that was actually on site from that game has been removed from that position. Obviously, the NFLPA's investigation is still ongoing, so we'll probably comment on it further as and when something actually concrete comes out of that. But yeah, it was a worrying sight last Thursday. But it's really started a little bit of a trend in terms of backup quarterbacks coming in, for various different reasons. You look around the league at the moment, Miami have got their second choice quarterback, Cleveland second choice quarterback, for different reasons, obviously. And you can go through the league, and there's an awful lot of people now that are playing, Bailey Zappi, as you mentioned earlier, how he was third on the depth chart a few weeks ago. But James, as we've got you on, I want to talk about the man in Pittsburgh, and that being Kenny Pickett. We sort of speculated how long it might be until he saw the field. I think the general consensus was that we felt the Steelers would probably wait until their bye week, which is, I believe, something like week 8 or week 9. It felt like a fairly natural position to do it, assuming that the season was sort of going to pan out that we thought it may, that the Steelers were in a bit of a rebuilding mode. But obviously, despite his sort of comments in the media, very un-Mike Tomlin like to go against his own commentary, but he's pulled the trigger as early as in-game during week 4. So talk us a little bit about how he actually performed when he was on there. I know what the stat line will tell you in terms of interceptions. I think all 3 of those you could probably say you could really just wipe off in terms of not necessarily any of them being his fault. Obviously got a couple of scores on the ground, but tell us how he actually played, mate. And then the important question, as a Steelers fan, who do you actually want to see starting week 5?
It's tricky, and I have an inkling I'm in a strange minority group in the Steelers in terms of my opinion here. So I'll kind of go with what my opinion is and what I think the consensus is. But in terms of the actual game, say the interceptions really were a lot on the receivers, and some of them it was, good coverage from the Jets, which is a hard sentence to say. Say Chase Claypool needs to wake up really, and it's. He probably be better in a London game because being from Canada, he'd be used to the cold weather. He actually might be able to perform. But bitterness aside, Pickett did look like he kind of ignited the team a little bit. It was something different. And a lot of the talk inside sort of Steel Nation at the minute really is that Matt Canada is not the guy to be doing your play calling. And Trubisky didn't, Trubisky was basically saying that, no, I'm a fan. I think Canada's been calling games great. And I'm like, yeah, that's what you'll say if you're trying to keep your job. And Matt Canada was the only person keeping him in a job. And to be honest, I don't think Trubisky suits Matt Canada's play calling. I don't think he necessarily was the quarterback that we thought we were getting necessarily. And Pickett will have more variety and more about him, but I think the consensus was at the the beginning of the season that they wanted him to sit the whole year and learn sort of a Mahomes behind Alex Smith situation. Albeit, I do think that Alex Smith would have been a better, even now probably is a better hold behind than Mitch Trubisky. But say as soon as he came on, the game sort of flipped because the Steelers were getting pretty much done over in that game until Pickett came in. Suddenly there was a bit of a spark. 2 rushing touchdowns were effectively quarterback sneaks. So again, in the same way that the interceptions take with a pinch of salt, take the 2 touchdowns with a pinch of salt as well. 10 completions for 120 yards isn't fantastic, but 6 carries for 15 yards means there's certainly variety there that may not have been there before. Long term, though, and this is where I'm a bit different, I think a lot of Steelers fans were saying, right, it's Pickett time, just let him run, just give him the season to learn in game, etc. And let's get Pickett and Pickens going as a combined together. I mean, I think we're going to see the word pick quite often when it comes to the Steelers this year. Maybe not necessarily for those two, but I sort of looking at the Steelers' sort of next few games, I would be inclined to start Trubisky against the Bills on the basis that I don't want Kenny Pickett playing against that defense. I would rather literally use Trubisky as one final lamb to the slaughter in many respects. Let Pickett sort of take some more game film, learn from what he did against the Jets, and then either stick to the original bye week plan or go for it in week 6 if Trubisky if Trubisky gets so slaughtered in the press that that's going to be game over. I don't know, but I know I'm in a minority. Most of us say, starting against Bills, Trubisky is no longer a thought. I'm seeing Josh shaking his head, so I'm going to let him come up with a contrarian.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that you are completely on the right track. Allow for Trubisky to be the lamb to the slaughter, but not for 1 week. You need him for 4. Look at that schedule.
That's my thought.
Look at the schedule as the defenses, not so much the overall team. The overall teams are insane anyway, but the defenses, you've got the Bills away at the Bills, home to the Bucks, away to the Dolphins, away to the Eagles. As a Browns fan, I want you to put Pickett in there because Pickett will be run so far out of town after those 4 games and his confidence will be an absolute 0. Be my guest, completely destroy the kid's confidence. But, from a neutral perspective and from a Steelers fan perspective, Mitch Trubisky's stock is, lower than the floor anyway. You got nothing to lose there. Don't slaughter who's supposed to be considered the savior of Pittsburgh quarterbacking, going forward. He's the hometown kid. He knows where the flipping what was the trope at the start of the season. He knows where the coffee machine is or something like that.
I've
he knows the place.
If I'm honest.
Yeah, he knows the place backwards and forwards. He gets Pittsburgh, etc., etc. No one's saying that if he's throwing 14 picks after the Bills, Bucks, and Dolphins come to town. And I'm not even saying that as someone that's saying that he's going to throw a lot of picks. I'm saying that as someone as you're playing those defenses, you're going to throw picks.
The exception is having, and this stat surprised me as well, with my fantasy head on, the Dolphins are the second worst team against quarterbacks when it comes to fantasy points. And it's not a perfect sort of descriptor, but it's an interesting stat. Only the Lions are worse in fantasy land. But and I say that in terms of fantasy football, not in terms of in my head.
I was going to say it's dinking.
So I can see him getting in halfway through that game potentially.
Yeah,
but
it's dinking and dunking the Dolphins allow.
I'm just hoping, that they go Trubisky now until the bye week. Let him take the press beating for the horrible offenses. Come back against. I mean, the first week back after the bye is the Saints, which isn't a great defense to be up against either. But it would be the natural progression to go for, and then you play the Bengals on a primetime game just after that. So it's not an easy run, and I can see why all the soundbites at the beginning of the season were play Trubisky for the season and Pickett starts next year. So, I mean, to be honest, the biggest surprise for me, not of the weekend, but certainly for me with the Steelers, was that they actually pulled the trigger in this game, even with the Jets. I still don't understand it necessarily. I know we didn't have much of a spark, but if your plan is to let Trubisky run to the end of the season, you stick to it. And it's very un-Mike Tomlin to turn it away. And there's a part of me that thinks this is Matt Canada trying to save his own skin, in all honesty. And I think that's futile right now. I think the fans are chasing him out as much as Trubisky. So it felt like a bit of a desperate roll of the dice. So we'll see how it goes, but it's very much not sunny in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it was like so that was the biggest surprise for me. Like I say, Tomlin's normally very principled, isn't he? And if he said something, generally speaking, he sticks to it. So it was a bit strange. Just in terms of the other side, obviously another win on the road for the Jets. That's 2 wins against AFC North opponents on the road. Zach Wilson's first action of the season. I think it's safe to say he looked a little bit rusty. But I think there are promising signs for this Jets team. We've talked about it enough with some of the young playmakers that they've got. In terms of Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, obviously not a young player, but he certainly stepped up as a veteran, certainly down the stretch yesterday. Came up big. I think times are actually quite promising for the Jets. But again, there are a number of teams that are at 2-2. The Jets are one of them that, will win games you probably don't expect them to, and then lose ones that you thought they actually would go on and win. So certainly an interesting few weeks ahead for both of those 2 teams. My third and final statement then, fellas, I've mentioned it in terms of what I loved. And I'm going to link this into a little bit in terms of week number 3 as well, is just in terms of the London games. So I mentioned earlier that it was great to have it back. I mentioned the fact that it felt like a big occasion again. Green Bay obviously do complete the set of 32 teams. So every team will have played at least once in the UK, which, like I say, is an incredible thing to even consider. I always say to people, can you imagine the Premier League sending, Manchester City versus Liverpool away or something like that? It just wouldn't happen, would it? So really bizarre, but great nonetheless. In terms of this week's games, though, fellas, I want to talk to you about how on earth does American football defy physics? How on earth does that ball hit the post, come down at basically a 90-degree angle, hit the upright, and then bounce out? I mean, it was a crazy finish. Plenty to talk about in terms of that game, but it was dominated by field goals. The one thing that really frustrated me, and what we haven't got better at in 14 years, is American commentators and some of their ridiculous stereotypes saying that the Brits just love people to kick footballs.
They just love the kicking. They love the field goals.
Yeah. I was waiting for Harry Kane to come out for the Saints.
Yeah, that final few minutes, though, fellas, it was bonkers, wasn't it? Will Lutz hitting from 60, Greg Joseph hitting from 47, and then Will Lutz from 61. Like I say, basically as close as you can be without it going over. Probably in the end, one of the more entertaining London games in terms of the finish, I would say. Josh, what do you reckon?
Absolutely. I joked on our chat that when Will Lutz was going to take that kick, that 80 to 90% of that stadium was begging for him to get it over so that they could have overtime. I remember one of the all-time classics in London was the Bengals against the Redskins, where it went all the way to the very last say. I think it ended in a tie as well, if memory serves me correctly. Yes, it did. There were some missed field goals and all sorts going on in that game as well. And it actually went through to being a tie. And that was probably the best game of which there's been. I think that the Brits just love an entertaining, shocking, things can go anywhere game. And I think that's because of the fact you got a massive neutral base that go down there as well. I think that Americans still find it quite weird that, the game is filled with all sorts of different shirts of different teams. It's not just the fans of the two teams that go down there. It's a celebration of football. So, we'll happily take whatever games come our way, it seems, just as long as they provide their own entertainment. I think that we'd even cheer a 13-13 snooze fest as long as it brought about some drama. And this one definitely had drama, but also it had the typical underdog story coming back, an Andy Dalton-led Saints team actually looking the more likely to win the game at one point, despite being slaughtered in the first half. So, it had everything you wanted from a British perspective for sure.
Yeah, definitely. James, I'm going to throw a question to you just with your fancy sort of head on to some extent, I guess. But two receivers really sort of led the way for their respective teams in this one. Justin Jefferson, after a few quiet weeks, was really back with a bang in this one. 10 for 147, and obviously added the rushing touchdown as well. But Chris Olave on the other side, he really has all of a sudden emerged as almost the primary go-to guy in this New Orleans Saints offense. They probably expected a lot out of him, obviously coming out in the first round. But if you look at the rest of the wide receivers, there's a lot of people that seemingly have been on the Saints forever and a day in terms of Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, people like this that have, like I say, always been on the depth chart but have never really amounted to anything. But in Chris Olave, mate, the Saints seem to have found a player here, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask a lot of sort of fantasy people overall, they were saying before the season is out, Olave will be ahead of Michael Thomas, and that's regardless of whether Michael Thomas gets injured. And if he gets injured, that just accelerates. And proof of concept right here, I think. I think that switch has already been made. Rookie wide receivers in recent years have been Preston. Jefferson himself was a prime example, and Olave is one of the options to be this year. I think we'll get there, but Drake London was potentially going to be one for Atlanta, but he flattered to deceive this week. But Olave has been hitting reasonably consistently as well. Granted, the change of quarterback, I'm surprised how well he adapted to that, going from Winston to Dalton. Essentially, it seems like it didn't really phase him at all, which is a fantastic, trait to be able to have really in your receiving core. So I think when Michael Thomas gets back, it's a quite dangerous 1-2 punch, even with the quarterback question marks you've got really. So it's exciting times. Olave is very much a dynasty darling right now, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. Big win for the Vikings, ending up 28-25 with that double dunk, like I say, depriving us of overtime. Worryingly for the Saints, it moves them to 1-3, and like I say, a lot of that early season optimism is very, very quickly draining away. They need to very quickly get back into the win column. We've talked about a few of the games, fellas. Let's run through a few more, and I'll get you some commentary from you as we go through them. Cleveland 20, Atlanta 23. Plenty of points left on the field for Cleveland. Me and Josh were just breaking it all down on the Believeland Brit podcast, part of the Full 10 Yards Network. So go and check that out for a more in-depth review. But just in general terms, Atlanta just ran second half. Marcus Mariota only completed one pass in the second half and only 7 for the entire game. But the Falcons back in the win column, they moved to 2-2 as Cleveland dropped to 2-2. Arizona eventually woke up and found a way to get over the Carolina Panthers. It ended up being 26-16, but 16 of those Cardinals points actually coming in the fourth quarter. This was a really embarrassing performance at the half, wasn't it, Josh? And we've talked about Cliff Kingsbury before. I know you're not a huge Kyler Murray fan, and that's probably me being polite to say you're not a huge Kyler Murray fan. But this was a really, really poor performance. And 4 weeks in, Carolina have got to be, if not the 32nd best team, now better than the 31st best team in the NFL. And the Cardinals really struggled here, didn't they, mate?
Yeah, I'm someone that's tried to give the Cardinals a pretty wide berth just because of how talented the roster seemed on paper. My patience has been exhausted after this week. I've been slated on the Power Rankings podcast, which you can get on Wednesday, for having the Cardinals as high as I did. I now have learnt my lesson. It was painful. It was so painful. And honestly, it does start at Kyler Murray. The guy can't see past his line. And when he rolls out now, people know he's going to roll out left or right. They just follow him, and then he just goes around in a circle. And that's all you had all game. I had money riding on the game, and I'm crying in my hands thinking Baker Mayfield's going to lose me 500 quid. I can't believe it. But then Baker did Baker things, and I wonder if Baker Mayfield makes it past Halloween. I really do. Which is shocking when you consider that Sam Darnold is the next best alternative, and you might as well have a cardboard cutout playing at quarterback. So yeah, there's massive issues in Carolina at the moment. They start at QB, and outside of McCaffrey and maybe DJ Moore, you don't really have too much else going on either. So, the Panthers aren't great. Stupidly enough, I still wouldn't have them as one of the bottom 2 teams in the league. They're close. They are close.
I look forward to those power rankings to see who you found worse.
Oh, yes, don't worry.
I look forward to that indeed. Maybe one of the teams that you think is worse is the Washington Commanders, because they continue to look pretty abysmal. They go down 25-10 to the Dallas Cowboys. Cooper Rush getting it done. I think is he the first Cowboy to win his first 4 games or something I read the other day? Or he's certainly joined a pretty illustrious group. He's doing a pretty stellar job, isn't he, filling in for Dak Prescott. So the Cowboys, they improve to 3-1 after that opening day defeat. And in the AFC South battle, the Tennessee Titans 24, the Colts 17. The Colts really paying the price here for sleepwalking at the start of the game. They were down 14-0 before they even really got going. Huge day for Mo Alley-Cox from the Colts. We've been sort of saying, haven't we, outside of Michael Pittman, who's going to actually step up? Well, Mo Alley-Cox did this week, 6 for 85 yards with 2 touchdowns. But James, this is a division that seemingly is going to be wide open. We'll throw the Jags in there. We'll get onto that game against the Eagles shortly. But these games always feel like they're going to be really, really important come the end of the season. And for the Titans to actually go on the road and get this one, huge win for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was huge. And in some ways, this game felt almost like a disappointment in a way. But then again, that's again with my fantasy hat on, and Jonathan Taylor, who, in many people in fantasy was a 101 or 102 kind of pick. He did 20 carries for 42 yards, 1 reception for 1 yard, and lost a fumble, which is not the stat line you paid for. And when he doesn't get going, that team doesn't seemingly get going. Matt Ryan's not being what they want him to be. Michael Pittman was ineffective. And they have a tight end room that's actually pretty talented and that they like to use, but it's very much spread between a lot of them. Just there are some weeks where some will be better than others. When you're Tennessee, if you've got Derrick Henry, you can stack the box all you want. He will still try and run through you and usually succeed. And was just one of those weeks this week. So, again, this is one of those games that we might look back at the end of the season, might be a decision maker. It could be that I think when Tennessee play the Jags, I think might be possibly the most key game though this season. Okay.
Yeah, it could well be shaping up that way, isn't it? I mean, Indianapolis certainly outgained in terms of yardage in this one massively. Tennessee, if you look at it, Ryan Tannehill, 17 of 21, but only for 137 yards. No receiver getting beyond 38 yards. It seems a real struggle for the Titans offensively at the moment, but the Colts can't seemingly get out their own way a week after defeating the Chiefs, back down to earth, big style. We touched on 48 Seattle, 45 Detroit, just a wild, wild game, wasn't it? We mentioned the Scorigami, but just great performances from both of the quarterbacks in this one. Geno Smith and Jared Goff both excelling, and big days on the ground for Rashad Penny and Jamal Williams, respectively, as well. So, yeah, plenty of points on offer in that one. It was a really entertaining game, which we expected it may well be going in, because although we don't think either of those sides potentially are going to be involved come the real business end of the season, they're certainly as fun to watch as anybody has been so far. New England 24, Green Bay 27, eventually with the final kick of overtime. Just a really bizarre game, this one, Josh, wasn't it? Like you say, you sort of watch it to start with and you see Brian Hoyer go down and you just think to yourself, well, we all know which way this is going to go now. But it just never, ever happened, did it? Green Bay really did trudge their way through this one, and ultimately had to get a touchdown to actually send it to overtime in the fourth quarter. And like I say, they relied on a Mason Crosby 31-yarder to win it as time expired. But for me, there's still a lot of question marks about this Green Bay side. And for New England, they'll probably be quite pleased in terms of the fact that Bailey Zappi didn't disappear up his own backside. He came in there, he looked, relatively competent given the expectation level that he would have come in with. And obviously, with that ground game of Harris and Stevenson, they kept the game close throughout, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And honestly, this is a result of Green Bay's own doing. Green Bay's offense looked like week one against the Vikings, where they just did not get anything going whatsoever. Their wide receivers seemed off, apart from a couple of really flashy plays. And then outside of that, they seem to just be at sea, possibly because they just weren't prepped for what a Zappy game plan might look like. So potentially the confusion sort of came into there. So from a defensive point of view, I can sort of understand conceding a few drives to that. But when it comes down to the Packers not being able to put away the Patriots on their offense and on Aaron Rodgers, it's Aaron Rodgers threw a pick that was, of someone that is several tiers below him in terms of it was essentially a gift, and you can't blame that on a wide receiver. I know that apparently it was a curl route, and the fact that the cornerback telegraphed the route before the wide receiver got there, but you've got to see that he was there before he threw the ball. Rodgers can't make that throw, and I feel like Rodgers is not the guy that's going to be able to elevate this group to bigger and better things now, simply because the team's not there for him now. And also, can the Packers please use Aaron Jones like he's a top running back? Because it ain't happening right now, and it's killing them.
Yeah, it's a transitional period, it seems, for them, isn't it? Ironically, of the three quarterbacks that actually played in the game, the lowest rated quarterback of the three, Aaron Rodgers. How about that? Better rating for Bailey Zappi and Brian Hoyer. James, you said you got a stat. Was that the stat? Have I just stole it from you, mate? Or have you got another one?
Nope. Bailey Zappi's his touchdown throw to Devontae Parker was the first passing touchdown this season for a rookie quarterback. Granted, there's not been many games for them this season, but because Pickett's were both rushing touchdowns, it was the first passing touchdown. And there's been like everywhere going around in fantasy world again. It's like, who started Bailey Zappi? And I'm here shyly saying that in my 32 team league, I actually was forced to sign because I had Trey Lance. So that was 6 points I didn't deserve, and that's 6 points that might have beaten my wife in a matchup.
Oh dear, you'll be popular then in your household. You'll be popular. Josh, you've got a stat as well, Josh, not to be outdone.
Yeah, I'm actually going to supersede the stat. The Zappi touchdown is the first touchdown by a rookie quarterback not from the Packers at Lambeau Field ever. That was a stat. That was a stat that came out on the telecast last night. And when you consider just how long Lambeau Field's been around, yeah, that's... and also the Packers are now the winningest team in NFL history. They finally took that off the Bears with that win last night, seeing as the Bears did not win this week.
Well, that's a lovely segue to the next few games. Thank you very much for that, my friend. It's almost like we rehearsed that, but I can guarantee you we didn't. But yeah, we'll go Chicago 12, the New York Giants 20. Just two poor sides. It's got to be said. I know the Giants are 3-1 now, but I've no idea how they've managed to get to 3-1. Well, I do know how they've managed it. They've just run with Saquon Barkley, haven't they? 31 attempts in this one for 146 yards. He took plenty of direct snaps as well. But yeah, obviously massive injury concerns for the Giants moving forward in terms of Daniel Jones and potentially Tyrod Taylor. We could get Davies Webb at London this weekend. Wouldn't that be a joy for everybody? It still might be a better showing now than what Justin Fields seemingly continues to put out for the Chicago Bears. Another poor day, although there was seemingly a more concerted effort to actually push the ball down the field this week. Darnell Mooney getting a bit more involved in the game plan. But ultimately, the Bears fall to 2-2. They could only manage the 12 points, and all of those were Michael Badgley field goals. So, yeah, not exactly a pretty game. We've touched on the London game plenty. Minnesota 28, the Saints 25. So let's talk around the Chargers 34-24 over Houston. Because of other results, Houston now the only team without a win on the season. An important win, though, James, for the Chargers here to actually get back to an even record of 2-2. And I suppose even more importantly, no further injuries and Justin Herbert looking a little bit more like Justin Herbert this week.
Yeah, I think that was the key one. Is coming out of it without a major, additional injury to add to the list. So the defense is still rather banged up and will be for a few weeks, I think. And hence, in some ways, that probably contributed to Houston having a go at getting back into the game late on. But the offense seemingly is starting to sort of rouse itself back again, sort of, stop ruling themselves out of it. So that's all good news. Nice to see Austin Eckler finally showing up. Last season's equal top touchdown scorer, coming up with his first three of the season yesterday. So it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all over for the Chargers.
No, certainly not. Certainly not by a long stretch. Philadelphia improved their record to 4-0, the only undefeated side, but they had a little bit of a scare. They spotted the Jags a 14-point head start with a interception, pick six, and Trevor Lawrence finding Jamal Agnew to give them that 14-point lead. But seemingly then after that, fellas, every highlight that I've seen, I think Trevor Lawrence must have had a bit of butter on those fingers. I know it was incredibly wet, but he seemed to mishandle snaps. He seemed to fumble the ball away. We've been praising him in recent weeks, but he actually had 4 fumbles yesterday and somehow managed to lose all 4 of them. Added to the fact that he was intercepted once and was sacked 4 times. Ultimately, it was a game that the Jags made too many mistakes, Josh, to overcome what is a pretty decent Eagles side anyway. Let's be honest, the Jags would have needed to have played a pretty perfect game. And although they got a perfect start, they couldn't sustain it. And as has been the case, the Eagles, particularly with that running game, Miles Sanders seemingly jumping out of the pack this week. It's been a committee approach in general terms, but they rode Miles Sanders as the hot hand all game in this one. He finished up with 134 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. We've said it a few times now, mate. The Eagles do look like the most rounded side in the league, don't they?
They really do. And, this is the first time that they faced some actual adversity and they overcame it relatively easily towards the end. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence's Butterfingers malfunction definitely helped. But when you look at it, just in terms of the way in which they were pretty much all the way through the game, the 14-point deficit didn't really seem to phase them. You make your own luck in this league as well, and the Eagles did very well at that. And, it just kind of speaks to momentum. The Eagles have got an insane wave of momentum at the moment that they're just looking to carry on from. I think the Jags are still learning how to win, especially against some of these bigger sides as well. And I mean that obviously in the greatest of respects. It's definitely not it's definitely not a dig. Against these bigger teams, you can get overawed, and you can look at big leagues, and we've seen big leads get given against teams that you look at it on paper and you think you shouldn't be having these leads, and it's about whether or not you can convert that into wins. We've seen teams being able to claw them back, and we've seen teams that have not surrendered. And the Jags just need to get a little better when it comes to that. So much closer than I thought it was going to be, but the Eagles showing their true form that wills out in the end.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. The Raiders, I mentioned that Houston are the only winless team. That's because the Raiders got their first win of the season At home, they defeat the Broncos 23 points to 32. Big game here for Josh Jacobs, who, again, seemingly a back that has been a little bit out in the cold, but 28 attempts for 144 yards, also added 5 receptions through the air. Devontae Adams a lot more involved this week as well, with 13 targets, as the Raiders seemingly find a way to get things done on offense. And despite probably Russell Wilson's best game in a Broncos jersey to date, the team's still coming up short. The ground game really held in check, and really concerning injury news in this one, James. Javonte Williams, a torn ACL plus further damage to the leg in various different places. That's season over for him. This is a division that we said was going to be competitive. You've now got 2 teams at 2-2, 1 at 3-1, 1 at 1-3 through the first quarter of the season. How do you sort of see this one playing out over the course of the next few weeks? And which of these 2 teams in particular from this game do you think, when we're sort of talking in 4 weeks' time at the halfway stage, will have the better record?
It's a tough one because Javonte Williams was probably one of the Broncos' linchpin players and was going to be, gradually more of a focal point. Melvin Gordon can't seem to keep hold of the ball for more than 3 plays in terms of just fumble after fumble, really. And he's now potentially going to become your lead back, which is a scary prospect considering recent form. And it's a team that pretty much is, has been using the run game a lot recently, and you're now going to have to say to Russell, look, start cooking, please. Get the barbecue out, do whatever you need to do, grab your sandwich, go whatever sandwich joint you want, just get going, get Colton Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, anyone involved on it, basically. And I think the teething problems are still going to be there for a little too long. So I think the Broncos are in serious trouble, and even their defense that they were saying was going to be, what they were going to ride into it, is looking penetrable. And the Raiders found that out pretty perfectly. The Raiders now suddenly seem to have found a way to use Jacobs and Adams properly, albeit they seem to be still inconsistent in the way they do it. But I think long-term it'll stand them in good stead. But this is another division. We touched on it last week. It's going to be close all the way. I think all the way it's going to be close.
Yeah, most definitely. Like you say, still some teething problems for the Broncos to work their way through. But Josh McDaniels breathing a lot easier after his first victory as the Raiders coach. We touched on it earlier. The Giants, sorry, not the Jets. Sorry, I get my teeth in. The Jets, not the Giants. They beat the Steelers 24 points to 20. Breece Hall with the winning touchdown with about 15 seconds left on the clock. So that takes us to Buffalo 23, Baltimore 20. Again, another topsy-turvy on this one. Baltimore opened up to a big lead, 14 points to 3, 17 points to 3 at one stage. So 20 points to 3 at one stage if I keep working my way through the scoreboard. So, 17-point lead, but 20 unanswered then from the Bills. They come all the way back. This was a game going into it, Josh, that everybody was saying, look, these 2 offenses have been phenomenal. Everyone was saying back the over. It'll be a huge high-scoring affair. But both of these defenses came to play. In terms of statistically, probably the worst game from a stats point of view for Jackson and Allen that they've had so far this year. But I think these 2 teams both proved that they're going to be there or thereabouts come the shake-up. Because it was a really good game and a close one between 2 very good sides.
Yeah, I think that this was a real show of Buffalo's resolve, especially considering that they went down so far. The Ravens obviously have a hell of a lot of talent themselves. They're definitely a top 10 team. We've said that pretty much all year, and they do keep proving that. I think that Lamar Jackson's improved as a quarterback, and he's definitely in and around best quarterback of the year conversation. But you do sort of wonder if he's able to close out games in the way in which he was able to in his first couple of years as a quarterback. This is the second game now where the Ravens are giving up a multi-score lead. Evidently against good teams, but still, when you're in those positions and you're supposed to have one of the best rosters in the country, in the world, do you really look to that as as an excuse, and I don't think that you should if you're a Ravens fan. The interception that Lamar Jackson took, of which kind of got Buffalo, it was a fourth down, of which means that realistically all it was it was no better than a punt essentially, but it moved them from the 1 yard line, of which would have been difficult, put them onto the 20 and got them, already, with some momentum swinging as well. So questions around the Ravens just on whether or not they can finish teams off, but both teams can rest assured that they are definitely one of the better teams after this week.
Yeah, it was a really strange drive, that one, wasn't it? Because it started actually on their own 5 yard line, and it took up nearly 10, well, just over 10 minutes, James, a game clock. And as Josh alluded to there, they ended up 4th and 2 from the Buffalo 2. Well, it actually started, didn't it, as a 1st and goal. They got it to 2nd and 1 from the Buffalo 1, then went backwards. 3rd and 4, ended up gaining them 2 yards. So they were faced with 4th and 2. One of those, if you've driven 94, 95 yards, you probably feel really, really awful to only come away with 3. But obviously, the fact that they didn't come away with anything meant that Buffalo could do exactly what they did, which was drive up the field, start taking some knees once they were in field goal range. Is that one of those situations where you just have to accept the fact, well, look, it looked for all the world we were going to get 7 here, but we'll take the 3. We'll trust their defense. Is that a call that actually, and not just saying this in hindsight, but actually even at the time you just look at and say, do you know what, you've got to get the points on the board to take the lead here?
I think you did there in that situation, but that's one of those borderlines where you can fall either side and look like a genius or an idiot, and it just wasn't their day yesterday, basically. It's one of those where I think Buffalo proved how to manage a game even in a difficult situation for them, essentially, and Baltimore pretty much did the opposite. They showed you how you could throw it away from what was a pretty decent position. It's one of those where at 4th and 2, I was like, yeah, you're probably just going to run this in with Lamar, aren't you? Basically, it's what normally happens in this situation, or it'll be some kind of backward slant to Mark Andrews, and then heads up to the corner and say suddenly from them being even turnover on downs at the 2 yard line, you're giving them a lot of work to do, but interception in the end zone, starting them off at the 20, it's suddenly a lot more easy to obtain, and they managed it.
Yeah, I can say that you could easily go for it on that because you don't want to give the Bills a sniff. Obviously you have to kick it back off, and you basically have the same situation of, score against us, and they were very likely to at that point. But you can't take an interception in the end zone. That was the one thing you couldn't do. Give them it on the 2 yard line and force the pressure. Absolutely. Don't give it to them on the 20 and give them that momentum swing.
Yeah, like I say, they're two very good sides. Wouldn't be surprised if we see them facing off again at some point later on in the season. And the final game to look back on was a very entertaining Sunday night football, made up for the one the previous week, I feel. The Kansas City Chiefs 41, Tampa Bay 31. Always felt as though the Chiefs had this well in hand. They were up by double digits for plenty of it, and obviously the Bucs getting a late touchdown to add an air of respectability to the scoreline. This was a pretty big statement game, though, Josh, from the Chiefs, wasn't it? Who've had some question marks in recent weeks. All things didn't seem well in terms of the relationship between Mahomes and the offensive coordinator last week. There were some questions around some of the play calling, all of the usual things that come out when a team loses, don't get me wrong, but it certainly seemed to be bubbling along. But this was a really good answer, wasn't it? A very, very dominant performance, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
Really dominant against a team that they don't, they've obviously had all this bad feeling about because of the Super Bowl. I know that was now 2 years ago and they've played since, but it was a hotly contested matchup last time. This one seemed a hell of a lot more comfortable. They made life difficult for Brady and the Bucs offense. They had the running game going really well. I thought that Clyde Edwards-Helaire had probably one of his better games, if not, dare I say, a breakout game. Patrick Mahomes looked his, superb self. I mean, that one highlight of him with a jump pass in a really awkward, stupid position, somehow making it work. It's typical Mahomes. This is the point of the season where you go, this is it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they do kick on from here. Well, and just in terms of Tampa, James, like I say, they were obviously behind on the scoreboard for a lot of it. But you mentioned Jonathan Taylor and his disappointing stat line earlier. The Tampa Bay team, 6 rushing attempts for 3 yards as a team between them. Pretty rough day at the office. Leonard Fournette -3 yards. So, yeah, it's a really tough one. But in terms of the Bucs, we've talked a lot about them in recent weeks not having the weapons. Good to see Evans and Godwin back. I think because of the state of that NFC South, let's face it, the Bucs are going to be fine, aren't they? They'll coast their way, I would imagine, into the postseason, won't they, mate?
Yeah, I think it'll be comfortable. It's one of those strange ones where when you look at the rushing stats and you think, oh god, they've had a terrible day. You look at the fantasy box score, 18 and 14 in one of my leagues. They were just basically extra receivers, and in some ways that's just what you'd expect from Tom Brady, I suppose. Certainly in this day and age. But yeah, Evans going off. Nice to see Godwin back, not injured, and let's hope that actually remains for his sake more than anything, because he's been battered by injury for a few years now, I feel. And yeah, the Bucs will be fine long term. It's just a case of these games against elite teams, so to speak. It's whether they've got enough left in the tank to get it over the line. And I think a lot of this is going to be injury dependent now.
Yeah, but like you say, certainly a good Sunday night football to round off the week. We've obviously got Monday night football to come to round off the week. The Rams in action. Who are they playing, fellas? It completely slipped my mind. Who have the Rams
It's
got?
the 49ers.
There you go. Rams 49ers to round off the week. Update on the Pickens League, and I've got to do this because we've been told we've got to do this because Josh's other half is top of the league, so she wants us to give her a shout out. So Louise, top of the table, 41 points, keeping Josh at bay, miles behind Josh. He's on 40. So yeah, enjoy that 1 point lead, Louise. I'm where am I? Seventh, and James. Where's James?
Keep scrolling. It's 21st.
21st, yeah. So yeah, all still to play for though. Plenty of time to get involved. Tight at the top, as they say. So yeah, looking forward to another week of that because we'll start it all again, won't we? Week 5 just around the corner. Obviously, another London game. So plenty to look forward to in terms of the weekend. The Packers taking on the Giants. Broncos Colts starts us off for the week on Thursday night football. And then your primetime games this weekend are the Ravens and Bengals in Sunday night football, Chiefs and Raiders Monday night football. It'll be interesting to see which game Sky pick this week because looking at the pick'ems, everybody thinks they're pretty one-sided this week. Let's just put it that way. I've actually seen the Bills have been picked by 99% of people, James, against your Steelers. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see which one's
Who's
Sky.
the 1%?
Yeah, that's James.
I would like to know who that 1% was. That 1% is people going for the contrarian just because of the contrarian. Watch us win now.
It will be interesting to see who Sky actually do plump for in some of these games because, like you say, they appear on paper at least to be one-sided. But the beauty of the NFL, we'll be sitting here this time next week going, how on earth did they win that game? And how on earth did they throw that one away? That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty.
We will be back next week. Steve should be back from the States. James, it's been a pleasure having you on the last couple of weeks. There's some more holiday coming up anyway, pal. So you will be back. I think Josh is away for a couple of weeks.
I am indeed. Yeah. It's next Thursday I go away. So yeah, not the one coming the next 2 after. You can definitely have off me, mate.
There you go. So yeah, we might well get James back on, mate. But no, it's been a pleasure, mate, having you on the last couple of weeks. Insightful as always. In terms of insightful, if you want more content from the full 10 yards and all of our network channels, make sure you're following us on all the socials. The Go for Two pod later on in the week, previewing these games for next week in a bit more depth. betting podcast as usual. Josh won 500 odd quid this weekend, so the guys do know what they're talking about because we would always follow their advice sensibly. And obviously plenty of teams with their own channels as part of the network as we continue to expand and grow throughout the course of the season. We'll be back, though, next Monday to review everything that goes on in Week 5. Enjoy Tottenham, those of you that are going. I know there's plenty that are excited and looking forward to that one. And we will be back to review it all next week. We will see you very, very soon.